All right, I have a little bit left from chapter 17 to talk about, and I'd probably watch the video on with the actual math problem on rebalancing because this part might make a little more sense once you understand exactly what rebalancing is. But basically, rebalancing is the act of bringing your portfolio back into its target asset allocation. So I'm going to pick a really simple strategy just because it'll be quicker and easier for me to talk about. But, when I think about my retirement portfolio, I have about six funds in there, maybe seven. And so you don't necessarily need a lot of index funds to have a nicely diversified portfolio. But for the purpose of this example, I'm going to say I've got a small cap fund and I want it to be 20% of my portfolio, and then a large cap fund that I want to be 80% of my portfolio. That's really, this is not at all realistic. I would want to diversify across foreign, some emerging markets. At my age, I want a little bit of bonds at least, but at your age, you might not want any bonds. So to simplify it to be just two funds is not realistic. But again, just for the purpose of discussion, I'm going to only use two funds. So I want to talk about why we should rebalance in the first place. First, it controls our risk. That's actually the main reason to rebalance. It controls our risk. It brings we made this decision as to how we wanted to allocate our funds based on how much risk we were willing to take and what returns we wanted to achieve. We might want to achieve higher returns, but A, that might be impossible, and B, the risk level associated with those higher returns just might be more risk than you're willing to take. So essentially, if my portfolio gets out of this balance, so if it becomes more heavily weighted, for example, with small cap stocks, those tend to be riskier. That being out of balance has now made it more risky than I'm comfortable with. So I need to get it back into the 80-20 balance just so I can sleep at night because I don't want to take too much risk. So it controls our risk. It gets our risk back to the risk what we decided we could handle when we first decided on our initial asset allocation. So it gets us our risk back to levels we thought were satisfactory when we chose our target asset allocation. Now, our target asset allocations can change over time as I'm getting older and older and reaching the point where I need to add more bonds to my portfolio. So eventually, when I rebalance, I'm going to rebalance to a different weighting scheme than I had been using because I've just gotten older and my risk tolerances have changed. So that doesn't mean I have to stick with its 80-20 allocation for the rest of my life. And why does the need for rebalancing occur? So what happens, I'm trying to think of how to phrase that. Oh, I won't even give that a label. We need to rebalance because essentially, we decide on an asset allocation, we invest money based on the prices of those mutual funds on that day. The mutual fund prices change the very next day. And so the very next day, we're out of balance, but we might not be out of balance by much. But we need to rebalance because investment prices, and by that I mean the net asset value of a mutual fund, or if we're talking about an individual stock or the price of a single stock. Not that I suggest you invest in individual stocks, but you might, or etc. You might be trading exchange traded funds, and those actually change throughout the day, as do the prices of single stocks. So we need to rebalance because investment prices are constantly changing. As soon as they change from our original price, that's going to impact the weight they are in our portfolio. So our portfolio is only in balance for essentially one instant. The question is, when should we rebalance it? Should we let a week pass before we rebalance? Should we let a month pass, 6 months, a year? So, how often should we rebalance? Um, People have done research on this, not surprisingly to me, and it turns out that 18 months seems to be the optimal amount of time to let pass before you rebalance. There's a couple of reasons for that. The first is you may have to pay switching fees. Some mutual funds charge those. Um, if you rebalance more often, if you switch money from one mutual fund to another, you'll have to pay switching fees more often. If there are no switching fees, then that doesn't matter. But when you switch, you're essentially selling shares of one fund and buying shares of another. If the money is in a taxable account, when you switch, you're going to have to pay taxes. Using an 18-month time period versus, let's say, a 9-month time period ensures that your capital gains are long term. And long term capital gains, you pay only the capital gains tax rate and not the ordinary income tax rate. And paying the capital gains tax rate it's a lower rate, so that's beneficial. You don't want to do this switching or rebalancing or more frequently than once a year, because that's going to subject you to the taxes rate being long term. So here I'm going to put you can avoid the ordinary. Oh, I'm going to rephrase that. All capital gains would be long term and not short term, and therefore you would pay capital gains tax rate, which is lower than the ordinary income tax rate. Now, it could turn out that your money's in a tax deferred account, in which case this wouldn't matter to you because you wouldn't even pay taxes on it when you switched anyway, because you're not actually taking money out of your retirement account, you're just switching where the money's allocated, and it's still staying in your tax deferred account. But I also want to write, if you pay a switching fee, but they actually call that an exchange fee, you basically don't have to pay it as often. Then if you switch every or more frequently. Now basically what I do is, because my money is in a tax deferred account, so I don't have to pay any taxes on it. So the long term term thing doesn't matter to me, because I won't ever pay any taxes on my 403b until I start taking money out of it once I'm retiring. Also, there are no exchange fees on mine, so I don't have to worry about that either. I opt to rebalance once a year. And basically, what I do is at the end of December, because I am on vacation, given my job, I have a couple of weeks off at the end of December, and it just gives me the time to sit and review my accounts at a leisurely pace. When I'm not tired from working, for example, and I'm sure I'm not going to make a mistake. So just every December, I look at mine and rebalance. So that's how I do mine. But there are some other theories on rebalancing, and I'm just going to discuss those. The first is to never rebalance. I don't like that one myself because, again, if you, let's say, have 25% of your money in small caps and they're really volatile, the if you never rebalance and you've got 5 good years of returns from the small cap segment, the weight of small caps in your portfolio could zoom up to a huge amount. And then if they have a horrible crash the next year, your portfolio could suffer far, far more because you didn't rebalance. I just don't want that to happen to me. So that's why I rebalance every year. Some people like to rebalance on a monthly basis. I just think that's far too often. To me, that's going to probably lead to some anxiety because you're always checking your portfolio to see how it's doing. You're getting stressed because one particular fund didn't do well and the other did, and you're just, I think, creating more stress in your life than you really need. Also, if there are fees associated with switching, you're going to pay them quite a bit. So you could also do it quarterly. I still think that's too often. So here I'm going to go monthly/quarterly. And then some people don't look at it at a specific point in time. They don't go, I'm always going to rebalance in December, or I'm always going to rebalance on my birthday. They just track their portfolio and they say, "Oh, I'm only going to balance if I get a certain percentage away from my target." So they rebalance whenever their portfolio is X percent from the target. So let's say I'm tracking my portfolio today and I see that my small cap fund is at 27%. That would mean my large cap fund would have to be the rest, so that's 73%. And I want it to be at 20% for the small cap and 80 for the large cap. Well, let's say I set my X percent at 5. So if I'm more than 5% from my target, then I would rebalance. So I look at this, I want this to be 20, it's 27%. So it's more than 5% from my target, then that indicates to me I should rebalance right now. Or I might set this to be 10% from my target. I mean, to me, that seems a little high, but you might be comfortable with that much variability from your target allocation. So that's another way that you can do it. And that is all there is for chapter 17.